We're also joined by Mr. N.K. Singh, a member of the BJP and someone who understands economic affairs quite a bit. Comes in live for the discussion as well. Mr. Singh, thank you for joining us here at ET Now. Firstly, I'm sure you'd be thrilled at the verdict that we've seen come out. A clear mandate for the BJP and for the NDA, and looks like the BJP itself will cross the 272 mark.
Pardon? Was that the question to me?
That's right, Mr. Singh.
Well, I think that this augurs very well. This is completely consistent with the ground feel and opinion which we had, which has really now reflected itself on these outcomes, far better than any opinion poll or any exit poll could capture. And it augurs well for a strong and stable India, where I think that the leadership will not now be buffeted around by the compulsions of coalition politics and be able to take decisive steps which can catapult our growth, revive expectations, get the green shoots of investment going. So I think that this is a happy point, inflection point in India's economic history, where once again, after a long time, you will have a decisive leadership and a government strong enough to be able to take decisions which are needed to get to an 8% rate of growth.
Mr. Singh, I'd like to introduce you to Sadanand Dubey, who is a columnist with the Wall Street Journal. He has a question for you this afternoon.
Mr. Singh, I have a question. Now, you said that this government will be in a position to take India back to 8% growth. What decisions specifically do you think that the BJP-led government will be in a position to take with this strong mandate that it may not have been able to take had it been, say, 20-30 seats short of this?
Well, let me begin by mentioning three or four. First and foremost, I think that to overcome the paralysis of the executive, by that I mean that it's now more or less well known that projects worth over 6 to 7 lakh crores are stuck in the implementation phase for one approval or the other, or one hurdle or the other. Getting these projects off the ground means empowering the executive, which means being able to invest the senior decision-making process in the executive, that bona fide decisions will be encouraged, that they will be fully protected, and that they need not fear from multiple sources and multiple kinds. So I think that empowering the executive, in my view, is the strongest low-hanging fruit which can make a decisive difference in the overall milieu. Second, I think to send a strong signal to investors, domestic and foreign, that retrospective changes in taxes would be a nightmare which would never be repeated, that tax policies would be long-term and stable, they would be investor-friendly, and that the overall metrics in which we get macroeconomic stability in terms of managing fiscal deficits more credibly, managing current account deficits more credibly, those are priority concerns which the government would address immediately, and of course in the first budget which it presents. Third, getting the matrix of center-state relations to genuinely foster cooperative federalism and to genuinely make for solutions which would have the states, the federal states, as participating actors along with the central government. Mr. Modi has emphasized this repeatedly, that he believes that the autonomy of the states in terms of financial devolution, in terms of decision-making process, is something which is consistent with our constitution and which we must do. Fourth, and not the least, that some important legislations which are path-breaking legislations which have been hanging around for a long time, the GST, the direct tax code, and some other important changes which are necessary must be legislated upon even during the first few months of this government. It also means that many of the entitlement-driven laws which have really handicapped any sensible expenditure planning would not necessarily be scrapped. Repealing an act is even more difficult than enacting one, but that the implementation of those laws, particularly implementation of laws which, for instance, make acquisition of any land impossible, which for instance misalign wages with productivity, which has made India an increasingly uncompetitive market, those would need to be fundamentally rethought of. So I think that in
Mr.
my
Singh, just
view,
a quick follow-up.
adding up all these factors, in my view, can reverse expectations, can invest optimism, and in my view, reverse the kind of milieu, create a milieu which promotes and fosters growth and investments.
Just a quick follow-up. Are you suggesting then that the core of what this government can achieve would more or less be the same whether it was 280 seats or 320, but the odds of achieving that have been increased by the weight of this mandate? Or are you suggesting that there are things that you can imagine doing with 320 seats that perhaps you could not imagine doing with 275?
Well, let's put it this way to you, that if governments are tantalizingly kept on their toes of whether a bill would pass or not, then those are not governments from whom you can expect decisive outcomes. And that if you really have the kind of depth which this government and which we will have now, will enable the leadership to think of legislations and to think of decisions which they would have been thoroughly cramped by the compulsions of coalition politics. I mean, after all, it is not no dark secret that Dr. Manmohan Singh, who had been responsible for the far-reaching economic reforms of 1991, no doubt under the leadership of Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao, who gave him all the support which the Prime Minister could lend, in spite of all that, in the UPA 1, he was hamstrung because of what the left parties did not want. And in UPA 2 was hamstrung by some coalition partner not wanting railway reforms, somebody not wanting reform of the GST, somebody else wanting a different kind of reform. Those were the compulsions of coalition politics in which sometimes very sensible action was stymied. I mean, think of a scenario where one railway minister presents a budget, that railway minister is replaced within 4 days of the presentation of that railway budget, and that railway budget is substituted by another railway budget which is significantly different than some of the measures which were enacted. I mean, these were the compulsions of coalition politics. I mean, if you have a number of over 300, then you need to get on with the decision making.
Right.
You need to get on with the implementation.
Mr. Singh, sure, Mr. Singh, if I can interrupt you, let's get a view from industry as well. We've got Mr. Adi Godrej listening patiently as well, and I'm sure he'll be pretty delighted to hear the economic roadmap that you have articulated. Mr. Godrej, GST, I heard Mr. NK Singh articulate GST, and I know you for one have been batting for GST for years now, talking about the need for GST. But let's face reality, it was the BJP and state governments of the BJP that opposed GST for a lot of these years. Do you see political polarization coming in the way of GST, or do you think the Congress and BJP will collaborate to implement GST in the next 12 months?
Well, I think the NDA now is strong enough to bring in GST, get it done. Earlier the problem was the alignment with the states was very slow, very poor. I think the NDA could do that very quickly. Congress, having championed GST very recently, will have great difficulty opposing it. So I am hoping that the NDA will bring in the GST legislation as early as possible. As you know, once we pass the GST, from the very next day, you will have an increase in GDP growth of about 2%, other things being equal. So I think it's a great reform process which needs to be implemented early and to get to that 8% growth rate at an early date.
Mr. Godrej, thanks very much for joining us today. It's always great to have your insights here on ET Now. Good talking to you today. Sandeep?
Absolutely, Manvi. We've got Mr. R. Seshasai as well, Vice Chairman of Ashok Leyland, joining in with a quick perspective. Mr. Seshasai, I'm sure you heard comments there from NK Singh and of course Adi Godrej welcoming the economic roadmap that's been laid out. But help us understand, at the